Soil management. This is a quick one, unless you make it longer.
Oh, small format discussion, yeah.
I give the microphone to anybody who wants to talk.
It's okay to talk to yourself, just don't argue with yourself.
Take the mic away when I start doing that. Soil management stuff, we're moving, we now have five of them, five administrative consent orders. So far, so good. Again, this wide range of kind of interactions and amount of hand-holding that we need to do in involvement. We have several more that are in the pipeline in various, almost, I don't know whether almost ACO is the appropriate way to describe them, but they're in the pipeline, they're coming along. So kind of one of the ongoing questions I would have for you guys is, people have stopped screaming to us about the lack of disposal options for soil. So we don't hear about the soil crisis anymore. And so I am taking that as an indication that at least some of the capacity that this brings to the problem is helping solve that issue. And
fly a plane to an aircraft carrier and announce the crisis is over.
If I could fly a plane to an aircraft carrier and announce that the crisis is over, I would do that. Yes. So hopefully we'll have some more coming along. One of the longer range things as we get a bunch of these in place is to question whether, or not, this is a discussion that we'll have with you guys, is having done this and having a certain amount of these ACOs out there and these facilities out there, is what would drive us to, is there a need to do regulations for this process, or whether the ACO by ACO process is the appropriate way to keep going. Kind of, it's an open question. Don't want to have that discussion now. But that's one of the things that after doing this for a year or two, I think it's appropriate to ask of kind of where we're going with it. And rather than have, I don't want to necessarily end up with 50 ACO locations across the state at some point. It would probably be better to just bring it into a more standardized permitting process. Kind of, and have that process based on what we've learned from the ACOs. But we also may find that after 10 of these, the demand peters out, and that provides enough capacity. It's not economically, there's no economic drive for more facilities to open, and maybe we stop there, and that's it. So in the next year or so, that's something to keep in mind about kind of where we go with this, and what else is needed, if anything. What I'd really like is a big hard rock quarry, which could take soil for years and years and years.
In which location do you want there?
A generic one, preferably in New Hampshire. Really, I have a few needs. And then the last, I think this is last. PFAS and PFOA updates. We talked about this. Mark Smith had come to talk about it from more of a emerging contaminant perspective, and we were. Part of what he talked about was what's driving this a lot in Massachusetts is the drinking water programs, unregulated UCMR, unregulated contaminant monitoring reports, which just concluded, and the results came out this past spring, and finding a lot of PFAS, finding some PFAS and PFOA in drinking water supplies. I was going to say finding a lot, but that's more because it's impression. Anytime you find it in a drinking water supply, it seems that's one too many. So we have a couple in Massachusetts that came up above the health advisory. One in a well that is now not being used, and we'll deal with that kind of in its own way. And then one in public water supply in the southeast region that had to be dealt with in a variety of ways. Providing water from different, well, at least Lisa said,
I said it
under her breath,
Dilution.
dilution. And what, no, dilution is not the solution to pollution.
Carol
But
said that, I
in the short term, in the short term, in trying to identify what needs to be done to reduce or eliminate exposures, to get it to be drinking water below the health advisory, a quick and short-term solution is to dilute it with water from other systems or other wells that do not have it. You know, the goal in the short term is to deal with the exposure. The goal in the longer term is to deal with the source. And along those lines, this is where the RFI comes in that these are the tools that we have. Sending RFIs to potential sources of gradient, where we may not have sufficient information on hand, but we have suspicions that we need to know more. So we sent an RFI to a potential upgradient source to find out and ask about their use of these compounds, the frequency and the amounts and the nature of the use. And to the extent that we had information about other sources that would lead us to believe that they're at least a contributing source, we sent an NOR to start the MCP process or continue the process that they had already been taking up for this. And the last piece of this, with the PFAS and PFOA that came up with the RFI and the NOR, is these are not hazardous materials that are listed in the Massachusetts Oil and Hazardous Material List. So there are no reportable concentrations for them. There are no reportable quantities for them. And one of the things that I think we encounter is kind of the concept of, and this gets to the tyranny of the list that we were talking about with the historic field stuff, is if it's not on the list, it's not hazardous material. I don't have to worry about it. If it's not on the list, I don't have to worry about it. And that's not true. And maybe this is something for one of those 5-minute moments that we can talk about, but something to leave you with thinking about what it means to be a hazardous material. And the MCP has a section which now I can't quote offhand. I'm sure Gerard could, but we don't have to. There's a section in there that says, you know what's a hazardous material? You can identify hazardous material one of 3 ways. The first one is, I'm going to get to last. The second one is it's on the list. If it's on the list, it's a hazardous material. But the flip side of that isn't true, that if it's not on the list, it's not a hazardous material. That's a fallacy. If it's not on the list, it means you just don't know yet. And one way of finding out is the MCP, as you know, has a section that deals with essentially the hazardous waste characteristic criteria. That if it's characteristic by flammability, ignitability, toxicity, it's a hazardous. It's also a hazardous material, and so if it's not on the list, you can look there and see if it's a characteristic. But there's also another piece of it, which is going back to the statutory definition of hazardous material, which is fairly broad, which looks at whether whether the substance in whatever quantity is toxic, it's radioactive, it's infectious, it's a wide range of things. Chapter 21E gives the state kind of broad authority and to look at a chemical or a substance and determine whether it's a hazardous material or not. So in looking at this, the information that's available for the PFAS and PFOA compounds, the toxicity studies that have been done, that clearly indicate that it's a hazardous material, it poses a risk. So as part of the RFI and the NOR, we're pointing out that this is by the statutory definition hazardous material, and as such, we would like either the further investigative work or some information related to this. So one of the things that kind of intrigues me, I'm interested in, is kind of what outreach, what information, what kind of discussion do we need broadly, and not to be answered today, but here's something for you guys to think about and send me emails, but how, it doesn't come up very often, but it's important for everybody to keep in mind that the universe of hazardous materials is not limited to just what's on the list. And people have to take that broader interpretation, the broader definition that's in the statute, because we don't want to be in a position where something is a problem, something is a risk, something is causing exposure that we're concerned about, and have to kind of deal with the argument that, well, it's not on the list, I didn't have to worry about it. That doesn't benefit your clients, it doesn't benefit public health. And I'm not quite sure what the best way to deal with it, and I think maybe an MCP little video might be useful. It's the answer to everything. But it's one of these things that doesn't come up very often, but it's something everybody's initial reaction is, it's not on the list. And it's not just you guys, it's us as well. It's the tyranny of the numbers, the tyranny of the list.
Isn't it characteristic of hazardous waste, not hazardous materials in regs?
Well, the section that describes it uses the hazardous waste characteristic criteria, but I believe
that includes toxicity.
Right. Well, but the toxicity is not like
it's not
the same toxicity as it's carcinogenic.
The concept is in there.
I mean, the waste is what we're really concerned about. I look at water as being a hazardous material. It's not on the list. But water is a hazardous material. People drowned in it.
I would like to point out. I would like to point out that it was not DEP that suggested regulating water as a hazard. Just for the record. We'll talk about that later. We'll put that on the list for further discussion.
member. Thanks, Phil.
I would think the Q&A would be a good place to address the question of what's a hazardous material along the lines of what you just talked about. Then it would be easily found when people are thinking about it.
Thank you.
I think all of your 5 minutes should be on the Q&A. I think all of your 5-minute miracles should be on the Q&A. because we will be able to find it again, and I certainly urge you to find that copious amount of time for people to work on the Q&As, because they're very beneficial.
For PFCs, is DEP targeting certain facilities like fire training facilities?
I think probably the best way to look at this at the moment is that we have the information that we're focusing on is the public water supplies that have reported concentrations of the health advisory. So we are targeting any and all possible sources that might contribute to those. In the case of Cape Cod, it's not only firefighting training academy, there's also airports. We have cases of private wells being affected by historic use of firefighting foam at a fire, or as fire suppression to prevent fire. So the use of foam off property, not in a training facility. Airports are one of those places where people routinely train with the foams that contain the PFCs. So one of the other wells potentially impacted by an airport, potentially impacted by a landfill. Landfills also are potential sources. But right now our focus is not on looking at the universes of potential sources up there and doing site discovery for those. It's focusing on where we know that there have been hits or water supplies that have been affected, and what are we going to do about them. It's really like any other site discovery where we've identified a problem exposure and then have to deal with it.
So I heard some other states are doing 20 parts per trillion, but 70 parts per trillion is the number. And what about MWRA? Have they looked at it? I wouldn't think it would be a problem, but just curious.
Deal with MWRA. Begin with, as part of the UCMR3, the Unregulated Contaminant Monitoring Report that was just completed, all of the large public water supplies in the state and in the country were sampled for PFCs. So that would include MWRA. And I haven't looked specifically, but MWRA was not one of the supplies that were affected. So, I've physically seen their non-detects, but
No, I wouldn't think it's...
it would be highly unusual if MWRA had that kind of problem.
20 PPT.
Oh, the 20 PPT. I would defer back to what the presentation that Mark Smith had made on the toxicity of the PFCs, and I think there are differences in what some states versus the EPA versus us. I think we're currently using the EPA health advisory, and the toxicity values that led to that.
That's 70.
I think part of the differences in different states are less to do with the toxicity of the compound and more to do with the relative source contribution. That everybody agrees, I think, and I would defer to Mark, but I think everybody generally agrees about the level of toxicity, but the health advisories assume a certain percentage comes from the site and another percentage comes from other sources, and some states can adjust that relative source contribution and make it more stringent because on the rationale that you're potentially exposed to PFCs kind of on a day-to-day basis, including maybe from your cookware or things like that. So it's how do you balance that?
Have there been any thoughts to add PFCs to the list?
Yes, there have been thoughts of adding PFCs to the list, and that would be something we would consider as part of the trail package. It would make sense.
How about asbestos in soils?
How about asbestos in soil as part of the trail package? We'll have more on. That's not a dream. As I said, as part of the listening sessions that were held earlier in the spring, asbestos in soil was raised as a potential, as something that the department could contribute. It would be a good thing for the department to complete that work and to do something. And my understanding is people have heard that.
When you say department, are you talking WSC or are you talking DEP?
That's kind of the crux of it.
Well, if I'm being frustratingly vague,
Like when we said
Secretary, not specifying what kind
the listening sessions were held specifically for the Bureau of Air and Waste Prevention Regulations as part of the kind of expanded EO 562 project. But comments were made about asbestos in soil, and including about its relationship with waste site cleanup. And so it would be in that context.
Understood.
I don't have to answer the question.
Why don't you ask it?
I have this great title, but it's not like everybody tells me everything all at once. So I mean, honestly, I don't know exactly what is being planned or what is going to happen, but if I had to bet, that I think we would be working on asbestos in soil in some form in the coming year. But
This is all unfair.
Next question.
but I don't know anything more than that. I mean, that's why.
You're being honest.
I'm sorry, and it's a little bit embarrassing that I don't know, but there's a process, and it hasn't worked to that point yet. We know what projects we're going to take up and how it's going to play out. But like I said, if I were to bet, I would bet that we'd be working on it.
Along with these topics, so a number of issues came up over the past year or so about the definition of oil and how it's used in the MCP in various locations and LRAs. GW1 issue, and so is the department thinking more about how that term has been used in the MCP as part of the trailer package, and whether some of these uses should be made more specific, and this sort of overall generic term oil might not be the best way to address the concerns the department actually has? Are you thinking about that as part of your trailer package?
Yes.
Wow, that was so clear.
It's easy to answer questions.
He says it's surprising.
Yeah, and you knew I was going to
It was either
able to
yes
answer
or
the
no.
asbestos question. Yeah, I mean, yes. I mean, part of what you're referring to is the Cuba oil case, which the department won.
But it's also the LRA.
But win or lose, and we won.
We got the one.
Geez, you're pointing out again too much.
I'm involved in so few legal cases.
I mentioned.
But the goal is to be clear, and whatever the specific. I mean, there were specifics in the case, but one of the things that came out of that is DEP can be clearer on things, and we always want to be clear. So I mean that. Yes, we will look at all of that to see whether changes in language could help. And I would view that less as a kind of big policy question. As, we're going to continue doing what we do, and it's going to work for oil the way that it really has always worked. We're just going to be clearer about it.
Well, I think part of the issue for LSPs has been that the department often seems to be sort of grasping at this definition and then trying to fit it into places where maybe it didn't quite fit was part of the issue with Peterborough, part of the issue with some other places that's referenced in the MCP, where the department seems to have used it in different ways or to account for different things. And so maybe going back and being more specific about, no, it's this that we were talking about, not this broader oil definition.
Yeah. And on that.
Well, yeah.
Unless anybody has any other questions, comments, or suggestions.
No, I'm just giving you your.
Okay, and I have a 5-minute warning, so we can end 5 minutes soon. So, nothing else. So the next scheduled meeting is the end of September. Two things about that right now, just to throw it out there. One is that we're currently under pressure to give up the room here for some other meeting that somebody thinks may be more important. And so we'll let you know whether or not we'll have that meeting or do in October, or as we've talked about in the spring and then got derailed by the network issues, there's the Whisper option. So we'll let you know soon whether we're having the meeting and if so, where. But that would probably, we won't have any decisions about that for another week. It would be the fourth Thursday in September. Okay. Thank you.